I'm Amber Cole. I'm 35 years old. And right now, I'm sitting at the defense table in a courtroom, watching my parents plan how they'll spend my inheritance. My fingers won't stop twisting the edge of this navy scarf. I've had it for 3 decades. It's faded now, the fabric worn thin in places where I've gripped it too many times. But I can't let it go. Not today. Across the aisle, Mark and Elaine Cole are whispering with their attorney, some slick-haired man in a charcoal suit who charges $400 an hour to smile. My father leans back in his chair like he's already won. My mother examines her manicured nails, bored, impatient. They're probably debating whether to buy a lake house or take that European cruise they've always talked about. $5.7 million does that to people. Makes them dream big. Makes them forget small details. Details like the daughter they abandoned 30 years ago. They haven't looked at me once since we entered this courtroom. Not a single glance. I'm just another face in the gallery to them, some woman in a simple grey blazer who happened to be named in their lawsuit. They have no idea who I am. Their attorney adjusts his tie and murmurs something that makes my father chuckle. The sound turns my stomach. It's the same laugh I remember from that day, careless, unburdened, already moving on to the next thing. The bailiff stands near the judge's chamber door, hand on the handle. The room buzzes with that pretrial energy, shuffling papers, clearing throats, the squeak of shoes on polished floors. Court reporters flex their fingers over their machines. A handful of observers shift in the back rows, curious about this heartbreaking reunion case the local news covered yesterday. My parents ate that coverage up. Gave interviews about their decades of searching. Cried on camera about the miracle of finding their long-lost daughter. They looked so convincing. So broken. So desperate for closure. The irony would be funny if it weren't so sick. The bailiff clears his throat. The room quiets. This is it, the moment where everything changes. Where 30 years of silence finally get a voice. All rise, he announces, and everyone stands on instinct. My parents rise with the rest, still whispering, still smiling. They're waiting for some grey-haired judge to walk through that door and hand them everything they think they deserve. Instead, the bailiff continues, all rise for the Honourable Judge Amber Cole. The whispers stop. My father's face goes blank. My mother's mouth opens slightly, forming a silent question mark. I stand from the defense table, slowly, deliberately, and step past the wooden barrier that separates the gallery from the well of the court. My heels click against the floor, each step echoing in the sudden silence. I climb the 3 steps to the bench, my heart hammering so hard I can feel it in my throat. I take my seat. I adjust the microphone. And for the first time in 30 years, I look my parents directly in the eyes. This court is now in session, I say quietly. Please be seated. My mother's knees buckle. She grabs the table for support. Good. Now let me tell you how we got here. It was June 1995, and O'Hare International Airport was absolute chaos. I was 5 years old, drowning in noise. The terminal roared with rolling suitcases, crying babies, gate announcements crackling through ancient speakers. Somewhere behind me, a conveyor belt groaned under the weight of luggage, and the smell of burnt coffee mixed with jet fuel made my stomach twist. My sneakers were too small, half a size too tight, pinching my toes with every step. My mother had bought them on clearance 3 months earlier and told me I'd grow into them. I never did. But complaining wasn't an option in our house. Complaining got you the look. The sigh. The "you're so ungrateful" speech. So I kept walking, trying to keep up. My parents moved fast through the crowd. My father checked his watch every 30 seconds like he was late for something important. My mother's heels clicked impatiently against the linoleum. Neither of them looked back to see if I was still there. Amber, move faster, my mother snapped over her shoulder. You're slowing us down. I tried. My legs burned. My lungs hurt. But I was 5, and they were adults, and the gap between us kept growing. We passed families hugging at departure gates. I watched a little boy run into his grandmother's arms, squealing with joy. A flight attendant smiled at him and ruffled his hair. For a moment, I wanted to stop and just stand there, to be near people who looked happy, who looked like they wanted to be together. But my father's voice cut through my thoughts. This way. They led me past the main terminals, past the bright shops and restaurants, down a long corridor that smelled like oil and stale air. The crowds thinned. The lights seemed dimmer here, flickering slightly. We reached oversized baggage claim, a cavernous space with concrete floors and exposed pipes running along the ceiling. A metal bench was bolted to the floor near a silent carousel. "Sit here," my father said, pointing at it like he was giving directions to a stranger. I sat. The metal was cold through my thin cotton dress. "Watch the bags," my mother added, gesturing vaguely at the empty carousel. "We'll be right back." "How long?" I asked. My voice sounded so small. My mother didn't even look at me. She was already turning away. "Count the bags," she said flatly. "Count to 500. We'll be done by then." "Where are you?" 500, Amber. They walked away. I watched their backs disappear around a corner. My father's brown jacket. My mother's blue dress. Gone. The carousel started moving. Luggage appeared, golf clubs wrapped in plastic, oversized suitcases, boxes bound with duct tape, ski equipment. I counted them like I was told. 50. 100. 200. People came and went. They grabbed their bags and left, dragging wheels across concrete, laughing into cell phones the size of bricks, reuniting with people who'd been waiting for them. 300. 400. The carousel slowed. The crowd thinned. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, one of them flickering in a way that made my head hurt. 500. I stopped counting. The carousel stopped moving. And that's when I understood something no 5-year-old should ever have to understand. They weren't coming back. The silence in that baggage claim area felt alive, thick and pressing, like it had weight. I sat on that cold metal bench, gripping the edges with both hands, my scarf suddenly feeling too tight around my neck. I didn't cry. Couldn't cry. The tears just wouldn't come. Instead, I felt myself going numb, like I was disappearing into the concrete and flickering lights and empty carousel that kept spinning uselessly in front of me. A security guard noticed me eventually. He was older, with a grey mustache and a belly that strained against his uniform shirt. He approached slowly, head tilted, already reaching for the radio clipped to his belt. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said, voice careful. "Where are your parents?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. What was I supposed to say? That they told me to count to 500 and left? That they weren't coming back? Before I could figure out how to answer, someone else stepped forward. A man in a grey suit. He'd been standing near a pillar about 20 feet away. I hadn't even noticed him. He was tall and thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and salt and pepper hair combed neatly to the side. He looked like an accountant or a banker. Professional. Forgettable. The kind of person you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But something about the way he moved toward me was different. Deliberate. Like he'd been waiting for the right moment. "Excuse me," he said to the security guard, his voice quiet but firm. "I saw what happened." The guard frowned. "What do you mean, you saw what happened?" The man knelt down in front of me. He didn't touch me. Didn't invade my space. He just looked at me with these incredibly sad eyes that somehow made me feel seen for the first time all day. "I saw them leave," he said softly, still looking at me. Then he turned to the guard. "Her parents. They walked away about 40 minutes ago. They told her to wait here. They haven't come back." The guard's expression darkened. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." My throat felt tight. "They said they'd be right back." The man's jaw clenched, but his voice stayed gentle. "I know. I'm sorry." The next few hours blurred together. The security guard called someone on his radio. A woman in a blue blazer appeared. She had a name tag that said Airport Services and a clipboard. She asked me questions I couldn't answer. "Where did your parents go? What flight were they on? What's your last name?" I told her everything I could remember. The man in the grey suit stayed the entire time, standing a respectful distance away, hands in his pockets. Every time the airport woman asked if I wanted him to leave, I shook my head. He felt safe. I don't know why. Maybe because he was the only person who told me the truth. Eventually, a social worker arrived. She had kind eyes and a soft voice, and she kept telling me everything would be okay. The man in the grey suit handed her a business card. "If she needs anything," he said, "please call me." His name was Thomas Reed, and he would save my life in ways I wouldn't understand for another 3 decades. Foster care is a lottery. Some kids get families who care. Most get places to sleep. I got bounced between 3 homes in 6 months. The first family had 4 other kids and barely noticed when I arrived. The second had strict rules about bath times and bedtimes, and speaking only when spoken to. The third smelled like cigarette smoke and instant coffee, and the woman who ran it watched TV all day while we played quietly in our rooms. None of them were cruel. They just weren't anything. I was a case file, a monthly check, a name on a roster. And then Thomas Reed showed up. He'd been calling the caseworker every week since the airport, asking how I was doing, asking if I needed anything. When he applied to become my foster parent, the system hesitated. Single men rarely got placements, especially for young girls. But he was patient. He filled out every form, passed every background check, took every parenting class they required. 8 months after we met, he picked me up in an old Honda Accord that smelled like pine air freshener. "I made up the guest room for you," he said as we drove. "It's small, but it's yours. You can decorate it however you want." I didn't know what to say to that. I'd never had a room that was just mine. Thomas lived in a modest townhouse in Naperville, a quiet suburb about 40 minutes outside Chicago. The house had beige siding and a small front yard with a maple tree. Inside, everything was clean and organized. Not sterile, just cared for. He showed me my room. It had a twin bed with a blue comforter, a small desk, and an empty bookshelf. "I wasn't sure what books you liked," he said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "So I thought we could go to the library this weekend and you could pick some out." I nodded. I still wasn't talking much. Thomas never pushed me to. He just existed quietly around me, making breakfast, packing lunches, asking if I'd finished my homework. He worked as an accountant for a firm downtown, leaving every morning at 7:30 in a pressed shirt and tie, returning every evening at 6 with groceries or library books or sometimes just a candy bar he'd thought I might like. He attended every school play, even the ones where I had no lines. He helped with math homework without making me feel stupid. He never raised his voice, never lied to me, and he never, not once, told me my parents might come back. "They made a choice," he said one night when I finally asked. We were sitting at the kitchen table, eating spaghetti he'd made from scratch. "A terrible, selfish choice. But it wasn't about you. You didn't do anything wrong." "Then why did they leave me?" He set down his fork and looked at me with those sad, honest eyes. "Some people aren't capable of love, Amber. Not real love. And that's their failure, not yours." I started crying then, the first real tears I'd cried since the airport. Thomas didn't tell me to stop. He just handed me a napkin and sat with me until I was done. That was the night I stopped being lost. Thomas Reed had found me, and he never let me go. Thomas died on a Wednesday morning in April, 3 weeks after my 34th birthday. I'd been living in my own apartment in downtown Chicago by then, working as a public defender, drowning in case files and court dates. Thomas and I had dinner every Sunday at his place. He'd make pot roast or lasagna, and we'd talk about work and life and nothing in particular. That Tuesday, he'd seemed fine. Tired, maybe, but fine. We'd eaten chicken parmesan and watched Jeopardy, and he'd walked me to my car like he always did. "Drive safe," he'd said, hugging me briefly. "Love you, kiddo." "Love you too." Those were the last words we ever said to each other. The heart attack took him in his sleep. No pain. No warning. Just gone. I didn't cry at the funeral. Couldn't. I stood in that bland funeral home chapel in my black dress, staring at his closed casket, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out everything important. A handful of colleagues from his accounting firm showed up. A neighbor. My former caseworker sent flowers. That was it. Thomas Reed's entire life, reduced to 15 people and a generic eulogy. A week later, I sat in a law office across from a woman named Dorothy Palmer, Thomas's attorney. She was in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a tight bun and reading glasses on a beaded chain. I'm very sorry for your loss, she said, sliding a thick folder across the desk. Thomas spoke of you often. He was very proud of you. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Now, regarding his estate. She opened the folder. Thomas was an unusual man. He lived very simply, as you know, but his financial situation was far more complex than it appeared. I frowned. What do you mean? Dorothy pulled out several documents. In 1996, shortly after becoming your foster parent, Thomas made a series of investments in technology companies. He was an early investor in firms that would eventually become major players in software development and internet services. He rarely touched those investments, just let them grow. She slid a summary sheet toward me. I stared at the number at the bottom. $5,700,000. I blinked. Read it again. That can't be right. It's correct. Additionally, the townhouse is valued at approximately $450,000. All of it, every single asset, is left to you, Amber. No conditions. No restrictions. It's yours. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the desk. Why didn't he tell me? Dorothy's expression softened. He wanted you to build your own life, to succeed on your own merits. He was afraid that knowing about his wealth might change your relationship or burden you with expectations. This was his gift to you, security and freedom, on your terms. I sat there, stunned, while Dorothy explained the logistics. Accounts to transfer, titles to change, estate taxes to settle. I barely heard any of it. Thomas had saved me twice. Once at that airport, when he saw a child being abandoned and refused to look away. And now, even in death, he was still protecting me. I walked out of that office in a daze, clutching the folder, wondering how I'd ever thank someone who was gone. I'd find out soon enough. Because 2 days later, the story hit the local news. And 48 hours after that, my parents came back. They didn't call, didn't write, didn't show up at my door with apologies or explanations. They sued me. The complaint arrived via process server on a Monday morning. I was getting ready for court, reviewing case notes, gulping coffee, when someone knocked. I signed for the envelope without thinking, then opened it at my kitchen table. Cole v. Cole, read. It read across the top. I scanned the first page. Then the second. Then I went back and read it all again, slowly, because surely I was misunderstanding. I wasn't. Mark and Elaine Cole were suing me for the entire inheritance, all $5.7 million plus the house. They claimed that Thomas Reed had abducted me from O'Hare Airport in 1995. That they'd been searching for me for decades. That Thomas had stolen their daughter and brainwashed her into believing she'd been abandoned. They portrayed themselves as victims. Devastated parents. Heroes who'd never given up hope. They wanted everything. And they wanted it now. I sat there holding those papers, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Not fear. Not even surprise. Really. Just clarity. Of course they'd come back. Of course they'd found a way to make this about them. Money has a way of bringing people out of the woodwork, especially people who've convinced themselves they're owed something. I called a defense attorney that afternoon, a woman named Claire Novak who specialized in estate disputes. We met at her office in the Loop. She read through the complaint with the kind of calm efficiency that comes from seeing terrible people do terrible things for years. They have no case, she said finally. Thomas wasn't convicted of any crime. You were placed in foster care through legal channels. There's documentation for everything. So why are they doing this? Claire leaned back in her chair. Because they're hoping you'll settle. Most people don't want to fight their parents in court, even if those parents abandon them. It's emotionally exhausting. They're counting on you being too tired or too traumatized to fight back. She was right about one thing. I was tired. But I wasn't too tired for this. I want to fight, I said. And I want to know everything about them. Every detail. If they're going to lie about what happened, I want proof of the truth. Claire nodded. I'll hire an investigator. We'll dig into their history, financials, legal records, everything. If there's dirt, we'll find it. Good. I left her office feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Purpose. My parents wanted a fight? Fine. They'd get one. 3 days later, Claire called me. We found something. What? A lawsuit. Filed in Cook County Circuit Court in 1996, 1 year after they left you at O'Hare. Your parents sued United Airlines for negligence. They claimed you disappeared under the airline's supervision. They said the airline failed to protect you. My stomach dropped. Did they win? They settled. For $470,000. Silence. There's more, Claire continued. To settle the case, they had to sign an affidavit. They declared you legally deceased. They swore, under oath, that you were dead. I closed my eyes. Send me everything. Amber. Send it. Because now I understood. They hadn't just abandoned me. They'd sold me. Grief and sympathy had turned me into profit. And now they were trying to do it again. The trial lasted 3 days. The courtroom was packed. Reporters in the back rows, curious onlookers hoping for drama. My parents played their parts beautifully. My mother wore soft pastels and dabbed at her eyes with tissues. My father's voice cracked when he described the worst day of our lives. Their attorney painted a picture of loving parents torn apart by tragedy, finally reunited with their daughter only to discover she'd been poisoned against them. They were convincing. I'll give them that. On day 2, their attorney questioned me on the stand. He asked about my childhood with Thomas. Suggested I'd been manipulated. Implied that maybe, just maybe, I'd been too young to remember what really happened at that airport. Isn't it possible, he said, leaning against the witness box, that you've misunderstood your parents' intentions? That what you perceived as abandonment was actually a misunderstanding? I looked at him calmly. No. You were 5 years old. I was 5 years old, sitting on a metal bench, counting luggage while my parents walked away and never looked back. I understood perfectly. He tried a different angle. But you have no proof that they intended to abandon you permanently. They could have been delayed. Could have gotten lost in the airport. Then why didn't they report me missing? He paused. Excuse me. If I vanished in the airport and they were desperate to find me, where's the missing persons report from that day? Where's the evidence they contacted airport security? Where's anything showing they tried to get me back? He didn't have an answer for that. On day 3, Claire called our witness, Lily Cole, my younger sister. I hadn't known about her until the investigation. She was born 2 years after they abandoned me, proof they'd moved on quickly. She was 33 now, with auburn hair and tired eyes. She walked to the stand like she was heading to her own execution. She testified that my disappearance had funded their lives. That people donated money to the Find Amber Fund they'd set up. That local churches held fundraisers. That sympathetic strangers covered their rent when times got tough. When the donations slowed down, Lily said quietly, they'd give another interview. Post another flyer. Keep the story alive. Because as long as I was missing, people cared. People helped. And when you were found? Claire asked. I was 8. I asked them if we were going to see my sister. My mom said. Lily's voice broke. She said I never had a sister. That I'd imagined it. The courtroom was silent. Then Claire entered the evidence, the lawsuit against United Airlines, the settlement agreement, the affidavit declaring me dead. The judge, a stern woman named Judith Callahan, read it with an expression of pure disgust. Let me be clear, she said, looking directly at my parents. You cannot declare a child dead for financial gain and then resurrect her when she inherits money. This case is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the state's attorney for potential fraud charges. The gavel came down. My parents were escorted out in handcuffs, their attorney scrambling behind them, already on his phone. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, finally breathing. Justice wasn't always satisfying. But today, it was enough. I used the inheritance to create the Reed Foundation, a legal fund providing free representation to foster children aging out of the system. Kids who needed someone to fight for them the way Thomas had fought for me. 6 months after the trial, Lily reached out. We met at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park. The conversation was awkward at first. 30 years of separation doesn't dissolve over lattes, but we are building something. Slowly. Honestly. I still wear the navy scarf sometimes. Not because I need it. Because it reminds me of something important. I wasn't the child who was abandoned. I was the child who was found. And that made all the difference.